People who have survived school shootings, what was it like? Serious. I was in the room when one student shot another at our high school, then ran out of the building. This was the 80s, so there was no lockdown procedure. We all just left the building in various states of shock. I never felt threatened, so it really didn't affect me too badly. The victim lived and the shooter spent several years in the Indiana Youth Center with Mike Tyson and one of my best friends from high school. That's a bizarre sentence for you. Coming up on the 9th anniversary of a shooting that took place at my high school when I was a senior. A student that had been suspended earlier in the day returned to the school with his dad's handgun, went into the office of the vice principal that had suspended him and opened fire. He struck and killed the vice principal and critically injured the head principal, who was responding to the sound of gunfire. The student fled the school and took his own life in a parking lot not far from the campus. I was in class at the time and an announcement came over the intercom that we were in a code red lockdown. Some students' teachers say they remember the announcement saying that it was not a drill, but I'm not really certain if that was included or not. My class locked the door, turned off the lights, and huddled in a corner, but I don't remember a feeling of fear or that the room was tense. We had had a couple of code yellows earlier in the year for small fights in the hallways, and code yellow red drills weren't uncommon, so the class felt more inconvenienced by the fact that we were just about to break for our lunch when the announcement was made than anything else. As we sat for longer without any update, a realization definitely began to come over the class that something more serious had happened, and we were all on our phones looking to get some idea of what was going on. This was before Twitter was super popular, and there was a ton of confusion and misinformation going around from texts that people were getting from other students in the building and from family, friends who were now watching the story develop on the news. We eventually received word that the school was going to be taken out of the code red and students, faculty would be released room by room and escorted out of the building by an armed police officer. We waited what felt like hours. We'd missed lunch and the room was restless, and finally received the knock on our door to indicate we were leaving. The officer walked us out the back of the school and through parking lot that led to a church that neighbored the school. I met up with my parents and went home to watch my school on the news. Later that evening I went to dinner with some friends to just spend time with one another, and we got word while we were there that our vice principal had passed from her injuries. We finished our meal in silence, paid our check, and went to the school for a candlelight vigil. There had to have been 400+ people with candles and homemade signs, and people just took turns praying and speaking to the crowd. Nothing planned or officially organized, just an opportunity for people to hurt together. It sounds cliché when people say, "I never thought it would happen here," but that really is the only response that makes sense after something like that happens. I remember an intense sadness in the days that followed and cried more than I ever had before or since. When I think back about that day, I like to remember the kindness of the community at the candlelight vigil and the posters of support from neighboring schools that lined the main hallway of the building for the next month. I was at UCLA during the shooting in 2016. It was only a disgruntled grad student shooting his advisor and then himself, but we didn't know that at the time. Everyone was assuming it was a mass. I was walking back to my apartment just off campus when the notification went out that there were reports of gunshots and to get inside because campus was locking down. I finished walking home and turned on the news with some friends. I had other friends who were hiding in classrooms. The craziest part was the amount of mass information going around on social media and in various group messages I was a part of. There were reports of more people shot and multiple shooters in a coordinated attack around various parts of campus and such. I'm not sure how much of that was fabricated maliciously and how much started with someone seeing a plainclothes officer with a gun or something and the story snowballing from there. I called my mom afterward and she started crying. She said she hadn't called me sooner because she didn't want my phone to ring in case I was in hiding. Honestly, really smart of your mom. I was around for Elliot Rodger's shooting at UCSB. There are a few things that I remember being surprising. The sense of humor. This was not everyone, but I remember a couple people making finger gun gestures at each other. I think this is because the event lasted a while and spread over the Isla Vista area, so there was a general discomfort wherever you were. I think people were coping with the stress however you could. Gallows humor, basically. The awkwardness of trying to console someone who just saw the friend's shot or were shot at themselves. If you have ever been in a social situation where you didn't know what to say, add in the fact that whatever you say might permanently affect the life of the person you are talking to. Your school is now famous for this. Although this was during a time that school shootings weren't super common, so that might be changing. I hope I'm not too late to get buried here. I was a first responder to Sandy Hook. I was a volunteer paramedic that worked 30+ miles from the school but was dispatched anyways regardless of the distance and response time because we were up next once the local EMS crews were out of service. If I had to describe the scene, I'd say life-altering. I thought I had EMS stories to make your skin crawl before Sandy, but now I can't even come close. The screams of parents and teachers and other students are still burned into my mind. The visual scene. I couldn't close my eyes for weeks without seeing bodies. My short answer. You technically survived the shooting, in my case, the aftermath, but I'll never be the same. I think of myself as my name 2.0. My name 1.0 was pre-Sandy and 2.0 is after. I am a different person. I am still in weekly therapy and haven't made any drastic moves towards getting better. Even just seeing this question brought my stomach up to my throat. It's a part of me I'll never be able to explain to anyone that wasn't there, and I don't tell anyone that didn't know 1.0 me because it's too much to put on anyone. It's a part of me I'll never be able to explain to anyone that wasn't there, and I don't tell anyone that didn't know 1.0 me because it's too much to put on anyone. My thoughts are with anyone that was involved in a school shooting brave enough to post here. Peace be with you all. Edit, you're all too kind. I'm in a group with the rest of the first responders from that day and we work through everything together. I don't believe many of us, if any, are still actively volunteering in EMS as a result of this. Also, I am a lady smiley face. I was a student at Virginia Tech during the 2007 massacre. I wasn't directly in the fire or anything, just a student in the dorms. It was very surreal. That morning my friends and I sat in the dorms watching the news evolve on campus. It started off saying 1 or 2 injured. At that point we didn't make too much of the situation. I remember the newscaster saying at one point that the new updates was over 20 fatalities, the final count was 32, and we all just froze. We assumed it was in error, it was not. As the day evolved we reached out to our friends to make sure they were okay, but cell service was very spotty. I had a very uneasy feeling that a somewhat peripheral friend of mine was in danger and tried to text her. It turns out she was shot but survived. Another of our friends was shot and killed. The next few days were strange. Classes were cancelled and many left the campus. President Bush came to speak to us, but I'm sure even he felt helpless with not much to contribute. Eventually, they cancelled the remainder of classes and exams from the semester and we left for the year. The summer was difficult. At my summer job people kept trying to talk to me about the shooting, both co-workers and customers. I don't know why, but I felt okay discussing it with fellow VT students, but nobody else, including my other friends and family. I eventually quit that job and got a new one, not telling anyone I was a VT student. Returning to school felt surreal. We did a lot of school spirit activities at football games, we of Virginia Tech, etc. But it was definitely a different atmosphere. I felt very uncomfortable in lecture halls, and whenever my mind went blank, I imagined a shooter coming in and killing us. That feeling still persists sometimes. In large groups I'll start thinking about a mass murder occurring. That day, I'll always say, is the day I grew from a child to adult. I changed in ways both positive and negative. I made new bonds with my fellow classmates but felt isolated from some other people. It was definitely the defining experience of my young adulthood. For a long time, I didn't want to talk about these experiences with anyone. Now I try and speak more openly about it because I am trying to advocate for a better future. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more Reddit content.